Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 17 of the Stained Glass Podcast. I am your host, Jessica Spurlock. And on today's episode, I'll talk about how God equipped me through homeschooling our children. Let's get started. When my husband and I started our family, it was just a given that our kids would attend public school. Practically speaking, we've already paid for it with our tax dollars, and we lived in one of the top school districts in the state. We wanted them to have all the opportunities with sports, music, and activities. And besides, my husband and I and many other successful people we know are products of a public school education. That was the end of the story, or so we thought. Our daughter went to public school for kindergarten in the 2019-2020 school year. She loved making friends and had lots of fun at school for the parties and special activities they got to have. Her and two little girls had become close friends at school. She was already a very smart little girl and was way ahead of her classmates and often got bored during class. She was also in a very large class of 25 kindergartners and therefore was not given much personalized attention because, frankly, that's impossible with that many 5-year-olds. And then the pandemic happened. We were all sent home and she never saw her other two friends again for a few years. There were several communication breakdowns between parents and teachers that happened, but it was due to not having those abilities in place prior to the pandemic. We would get a week's worth of lessons at a time, and they would all have a theme. Like one week it was birds, the next frogs, and then next it was butterflies. And my 6-year-old daughter said to me, "Mom, I already did this work except it was butterflies last week instead of frogs." Even she caught on to the pattern. And I don't really fault the teacher because that was a shift that no one saw coming. But I took matters into my own hands, and we did our own thing for the remainder of her kindergarten year. Now, she still did her themed work for school credit, but she wanted to do more on top of that. And before I continue, I need to backtrack and give you all a bit more context for the rest of the story. Now, you heard about my daughter's health struggles in the previous episodes of the Stained Glass Podcast, in episodes 9 through 11. Most people don't know what COVID would do to someone completely healthy at that point in time, so we didn't know what COVID would do to her at this point. And in addition to that, my son has severe asthma and would end up with pneumonia in the ICU on high-flow oxygen every time he got a cold virus. And COVID was much more serious than a cold. Not to mention that all the medication he was on to keep him out of the hospital is also doing a number on his immune system, which, according to the blood work, was actually fairly mature for his age. So we had to take the pandemic extremely serious. And the things that were safe for us to do when all the restrictions were in place were no longer safe for us. In-person school without masks was one of those things. It was fine for most people, but not for us because of that bubble that had to exist for a bit longer. Also, another bit of context for you. My husband and I are both engineers that normally work full-time outside of the home. With the COVID pandemic, my husband is now 98% remote, and before I changed jobs, I worked full-time for a plant but had the option to work from home up to 4 days a week. Okay, back to the story. Days became weeks and weeks became months, and over the course of that summer, my husband and I were just sitting back looking at all the chaos that was ensuing over the fate of the public school system for the upcoming school year. And with all the color-coded maps, the constant changing of the rules, in-person, virtual, switching back and forth, I finally said enough was enough. With my kids' health concerns, I knew in-person school at this point was not an option. So I looked into the virtual option offered by the State Board of Education. They would have to be logged in at certain times of the day, the course workload was pretty heavy, the contact with the teachers were limited, and they could be penalized for technical difficulties, and so on. It was mass chaos either way you looked at it, and it was totally out of our control as parents. Now, I understand that it is ultimately God who is in the control and not us, but at the time, I was so stressed about it and I prayed over and over and over for God to either just take away the pandemic or to show us another way. And I was on a FaceTime call with Sarah Fraser, who was on the Stained Glass Podcast in episode 13. And I asked her about homeschooling because she was homeschooled herself and she homeschooled all 5 of her children. And she gave me lots of great advice. Now, homeschooling was something that would have never been on my radar had the pandemic not happened. I had a full-time career in a field that if I walked away from it, even for a few years, I'd be irrelevant whenever I returned. And also, I'm not a teacher, I'm an engineer. I mean, what do I know about teaching school? Or so I thought at the time. We had a daughter in 1st grade and a son who we were planning to send to a K-3 preschool. But now we were obviously not sending them to school. I wanted to maintain a similar structure to school in case they ever went back. I wanted to make sure that I had a curriculum that not only checked the boxes of what they needed to learn, but exceeded those requirements. I wanted a curriculum that taught my children how to think about the world critically and not just be pounded with the memorization of techniques and facts. I needed something virtual or online because I work full-time and my daily schedule changed based on what was happening at the plant, and my kids couldn't sit down at certain times of the day to log in. I needed that virtual option to be easy enough that my young children could work it by themselves. It was a preference, but not a requirement, that this curriculum have a biblical worldview bent, integrating Bible teachings throughout the coursework. And finally, I needed something that was a package deal that had a lesson plan, videos, materials, online grading, tests, books, and workbooks all in one bundle. So, for my first grade daughter, we chose Bob Jones University, or BJU Press curriculum. Some of the videos were a little dated, but they were still fun and engaging, and I think it really watered her blossoming love for learning and for school. Everything was just at the right pace for her. Except math. With math, she and I worked together on a lot of the material taught in the first 5 chapters, which was just counting and number recognition. So I just had her do the worksheets for those lessons and the tests to those lessons, just to make sure that she had those concepts down, and then we kept going. And that's the beauty of homeschool. It's totally customizable and you can go at your own pace. She wound up finishing first grade math in February, and so we moved on to second grade math. Now with my son, I needed something for him to do while his big sister was doing school. So I created his own preschool. I got a teacher planner from Aldi, which, by the way, love that place. I love a good Aldi find. Anyway, I got a list of everything that he needed to know in kindergarten. Mind you, he's still 3 at this point, but I figured it wouldn't be so bad to teach it now and just reinforce it later. So I took that planner, I wrote a theme to teach each week based on that list, and some fun theme weeks thrown in just depending on time of the year or the holidays, or what his interests were. And then I found activities and worksheets on Pinterest. I also pulled from resources I already had around the house, like Play-Doh, shape pattern puzzles, craft supplies, and other things. And then I made a playlist on YouTube that went along with the theme of the day. I would mix up dance videos or songs with desk work and crafts. And since his attention span at the time was maybe 15 minutes, I could teach him the concept, let him play or watch the videos while I checked emails or attended to work matters. And we had a lot of fun with that. Even my daughter participated in the theme weeks that were not learning-based. We even had a Mr. Rogers theme day based on kindness, as we were all into watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a family at the time. I'll post a list of those resources in the show notes that I used to develop his curriculum. And that was the first year of homeschooling. When the next school year rolled around, we decided to continue homeschooling our daughter. However, we had planned to send back our son to the half-day preschool we pulled him out of the previous year. But the COVID cases were starting to swing upward again. My husband and I decided the best thing for us to do would be to hold off on sending him, with plans to send him back once the COVID cases trended back down and stayed down for a while. So the question came of what to do with my son. I couldn't keep up with doing the same curriculum a second year in a row. So I posed the question to our homeschool curriculum consultant, who was amazing, of whether I should purchase the preschool curriculum from Bob Jones or just continue with kindergarten a year early. I sent her a list of everything I taught him the previous school year. Her recommendation was to go ahead and start him in kindergarten because he'd be bored with the preschool curriculum. So he did, and he passed every test with flying colors. My daughter finished second grade math in October, and we moved on to third grade math. And she completed that by the end of the school year. In March of the 21-22 school year, there were 2 big changes that happened in our lives. By this time, things had gotten to the point with the pandemic that we finally started feeling comfortable with easing back into our old way of life. We sent our son to the 4-year-old half-day preschool in the mornings, just to get some social interaction and have him evaluated by his teachers for kindergarten readiness. And the other big change was that I switched from a hybrid work direct plant job to a fully remote systems integrator job. Now what that meant was that my flexibility increased, but my predictability had decreased. I could have the possibility of traveling up to 25% of the time. So after my son had completed the kindergarten curriculum and finished out the year in the 4-year-old preschool, his preschool teachers thought that he would be bored to tears in kindergarten and was actually more mature than his classmates and was ready for first grade. With these life changes, the Lord opened the door for us to send the kids to a local Christian school that would utilize most of the same curriculum that they were already used to. I could no longer keep up the pace with homeschooling 2 kids while working full-time, especially given the unpredictability of my new job. We met with a kindergarten teacher to evaluate our son, and she agreed that he belonged in 1st grade. They both loved attending this local Christian school, and they both flourished. In fact, due to my son's health struggles, we had to meet with his teacher because he missed too many days because of illnesses and appointments. And we were surprised to find out that he was actually way ahead of his classmates in spite of missing so much school. They will be attending this school again this upcoming school year. Now, I have 4 pieces of advice that I would like you to come away with when planning for your children's education. My biggest piece of advice for anyone considering their children's schooling, whether it be private or public, secular or Christian, or even homeschool, it would be this: take it 1 year at a time. We followed this advice and it has served us well. It can be overwhelming when trying to take their entire school year into view, but when you break it down and only focus on the year ahead, it makes it much less stressful. And that way you're more apt to pivot if necessary. Now, these next few pieces of advice lean more towards homeschooling. So the second piece of advice I would give is to find a quiz online that lets you figure out what your teaching style is and what your child's learning style is. This helped me figure out that my style of teaching is more traditional, and my daughter's learning style was auditory, meaning that she learned best with rhymes and songs. Now, there are many quizzes available, and some even give examples of curriculum that go along with the particular styles. The next piece of advice is to put as much effort into planning your school year out during the summer months that your week-to-week effort is much less. What I did was organize the lessons per week by using hanging box folders in a crate, and then each Sunday I organized them by day, with each day having its own folder. When the lessons were completed, I put them in a separate box crate, organized by subject, so that way when it came time to make the annual review portfolios, I just had to put them in a binder. So if you have space, you can skip the folders and just put them into binders. I did that with my son's kindergarten curriculum, and that made life so much easier throughout the weeks. And the last piece of advice would be to get yourself a planner that can encompass all of your children's schooling, and then write the plans down in pencil. Start from a zoomed out schedule that looks at the entire school year, and then zoom in slowly by quarter, and then by week, and then by day. That way you can be flexible and plan for time away from school, because sometimes plans can change. Now, if you feel God calling you to a homeschooling life, you may have so many excuses for why you can't do what God is calling you to do. God is gracious enough to give us what we need. God already knows your struggles and what you can't do. But can you look past those excuses and see that God is going to supply you with what you need? In the book of Exodus, when God summoned Moses to approach Pharaoh and demand the liberation of the nation of Israel from slavery, Moses was filled with doubts. He raised several questions. Who am I? What should I say? What if they don't believe me? Moses engaged in arguments with the Lord, pushing him to the point of anger. Eventually, Moses' brother, Aaron, became the spokesperson for God. However, Moses was not the only one who questioned God's calling. Many others who were chosen for difficult tasks doubted the Lord and argued with him and even tried to run away. Most of us readily embrace our responsibilities when they're easy. Yet, when the Lord calls us out of our comfort zones and into the realm of the unknown, we struggle with his assignment. We may feel unworthy of God's call, but he empowers us to fulfill every good work that aligns with his will. He equips us with precisely what we need at the exact moment we need it. Dear Lord, we thank you for guiding us through an unknown season of homeschooling. You have been our constant source of strength and wisdom, enabling us to make the best decisions for our children. We are grateful for equipping us with everything they needed to thrive and grow during this time. In your infinite grace, you have provided us with the necessary tools, knowledge, and resources to support our children's education. We acknowledge that without your divine guidance, we would have been lost. As we reflect on this season, we offer our heartfelt gratitude for the lessons learned, the bonds strengthened, and the growth experienced by our children. Your provision has been made evident with every step. May you continue to bless and guide us in our journey as parents, empowering us to make the choices that align with your will and nurture the hearts and minds of our children. Now I pray for the one listening to this episode of the Stained Glass Podcast. May the God of peace, who through the blood of eternal covenant brought back from the dead our Lord Jesus, that great shepherd of the sheep, equip them with everything good for doing his will, and may he work in us what is pleasing to him, through Jesus Christ, to whom be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Friend, I value your input and experiences, and I believe that together we can create a vibrant and supportive community. Whether you've discovered the unique teaching methods of valuable resources or personal testimonies of God's wisdom and provision, I want to hear from you. Your contributions can make a real difference in the lives of others. So if you have advice, tips, or stories to share about homeschooling or how God has equipped you in challenging situations, please reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at the Stained Glass Podcast or in Facebook in the Stained Glass Podcast group. And I'm also on Threads. Or you can send me an email to thestainedglasspodcast@gmail.com. I'm excited to hear your insights and stories and to foster an environment of inspiration and encouragement. So let's build a community where we can support one another and rely on God's wisdom and provision in every step. Connect with me today and be a part of the conversation. In the next episode, we'll take the final deep dive into the 5 stained glass making steps introduced in the premiere. It drops in 2 weeks. Until then, this has been Jessica Spurlock with the Stained Glass Podcast. Go be a blessing.